Good morning, all. Thank you for coming. I am Clarissa Rodriguez, Chair of the New York State Workers' Compensation Board. Today's meeting is being conducted remotely throughout various locations in New York State, as well as being webcast live for members of the public. So welcome. Thank you for joining us. Board members, please state your full name each time you speak. Now, I have the honor of calling the 1004 meeting of the full board to order. Madam Secretary, will you please call attendance?
Yes, Chair. Vice Chair Foster. Absent. Board Member Paprocki. Here. Board Member Higgins.
Here.
Board Member Lobin.
Here.
Board Member Williams.
Here.
Board Member Hall.
Here.
Board Member Ostley. Board Member Ostley.
Here.
Board Member Crane.
Here.
Board Member Stasko.
Here.
Board Member Taveras.
Here.
Board Member Cajanelli.
Here.
Board Member Delon.
Here.
Madam Chair, all members are present except for the absence of Vice Chair Foster.
Okay, thank you, Madam Secretary. May I have a motion to approve the absence of Vice Chair Foster?
Yes, Madam Chair. This is Board Member Mark Higgins, and I move to approve the absence of Vice Chair Foster.
Thank you, Board Member Higgins. Is there a second?
Yes, Madam Chair, this is Board Member Delon, and I second that motion.
Thank you, Board Member Delon. Is there any opposition to the motion? Okay, hearing and seeing no opposition, all in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? I am also a yes, that motion is passed. Thank you. Agenda item 1, approval of the September 21st, 2021 meeting minutes. Now, board members, you have all received a copy of the September 21, 2021 meeting minutes to review. Are there any questions or need for discussion? Okay, hearing none. Is there a motion to approve the September 21st, 2021 board meeting minutes?
Yes, Madam Chair. This is Board Member Mark Higgins, and I move to approve the minutes.
Thank you very much, Board Member Higgins. Is there a second?
Yes, Madam Chair, Board Member Delon, and I second the motion.
Thank you, Board Member Delon. Is there any opposition to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you. All opposed? I am also a yes. That motion is passed. Agenda item 2, Office of General Counsel's Departmental Report. Acting General Counsel Heather McMaster will now present the statistical and informational report for September. Welcome,
Good morning, Madam Chair. I'm sorry. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. In September 2021, the board held 17,059 hearings, 11,506 cases were resolved at hearing, and 417 reserved decisions were rendered. There were 1,706 waiver agreements finalized. The Administrative Review Division received 979 applications. They processed 946 applications. There are currently 3,335 applications pending. Legal Affairs Division received 140 full board review applications and processed 153. Their current inventory is 276. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Are there any questions or need for discussion? Okay, seeing and hearing none, may I please have a motion to accept the statistical and informational report of the Office of General Counsel?
Yes, Madam Chair. This is Board Member Mark Higgins, and I move to accept the report of the General Counsel.
Thank you, Board Member Higgins. Is there a second?
Yes, this is Board Member Delan, and I second the motion.
Thank you, Board Member Delan. Is there any opposition to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? I am also a yes. That motion is passed. Agenda item 3, license applications. Now Elizabeth Lott will now present the licensing applications.
Good morning, Chair Rodriguez, board members, colleagues, and guests. You have before you the recommendations from the assigned board panel regarding licensing applications listed in Part 3 of today's agenda. Section 24-A, Thomas J. Prisco, 3-year renewal. Section 53-B, Maxon Administrators, Inc., 3-year renewal. Gary Nichols, 1-year conditional renewal. Section 53D, Absolve LLC, 3-year renewal. Arrowwood Indemnity Company, 3-year renewal. I present these recommendations to the board for your consideration.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Are there any questions or need for discussion? Seeing and hearing none, may I please have a motion to accept the recommendations of the panels as presented and identified in item 3 of the agenda?
Yes, Madam Chair. This is Board Member Mark Higgins, and I move to accept the recommendations of the panel.
Thank you, Board Member Higgins. Is there a second?
Yes, Madam Chair, this is Board Member Delan, and I second the motion.
Thank you, Board Member Delan. Is there any opposition? Seeing and hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All opposed? I am also a yes. That motion is passed. Thank you. Agenda item 4, legal appeals. Acting General Counsel Heather McMaster will now present the recommendations concerning decisions by the Appellate Division.
With respect to items 4A through 4I, it is the Office of General Counsel's recommendation to adopt the decisions of the court as the decisions of the board. Thank you.
Thank you. May I have a motion to accept the recommendations of the Office of General Counsel?
Yes, Madam Chair. This is Board Member Mark Higgins, and I move to accept the recommendations of the Office of General Counsel.
Thank you, Board Member Higgins. Is there a second?
Yes, Madam Chair, this is Board Member Delan, and I second the motion.
Thank you, Board Member Delan. Is there any opposition to the motion? Seeing and hearing no opposition, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, I am also a yes. That motion is passed. Agenda item 5, mandatory full board review. We start with case 5A, NYC DOT, case number G2586657. Is there a motion with respect to 5A on the agenda?
Yes, Madam Chair. This is Board Member Mark Higgins, and I move the dissenting opinion to be adopted as the opinion of the full board.
Thank you, Board Member Higgins. Is there a second?
Yes, Madam Chair, this is Board Member Ellen Peprocki, and I second the motion.
Does anyone need to be recused from this motion? Is there any opposition to the motion? Okay, seeing and hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed? I am also a yes. That motion is passed. Thank you, board members. 5B, Crystal Demolition, Inc., case number 50307354. Is there a motion with respect to 5B on the agenda?
Yes, Madam Chair, this is Board Member Frederick Horsley, and I move that the board panel's unanimous decision as modified be adopted as the opinion of the full board.
Thank you, Board Member Osley. Is there a second?
Yes, Madam Chair, this is Board Member Pamela Caginelli, and I second that motion.
Thank you, Board Member Caginelli. Does anyone need to be recused from this matter? Seeing and hearing no recusals, is there any opposition to the motion? Okay, seeing and hearing no opposition, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, I am also a yes, so that motion is passed. Thank you. 5C, Vassar College, case number G1946578. Is there a motion with?
Yes, Madam Chair. This is Board Member Linda Hull, and I move that the board panel unanimous decision is modified, be adopted as the decision of the full board. We've lost the chair's contact for a moment. Just sit tight.
I tried at least calling in and that didn't work either. So I guess I'm having connectivity issues. Sorry about that. So let's continue with our agenda. I had to find a different computer. But so long as you can hear me, I think that's all that matters so that we can continue with our agenda. Okay, where were we? I think I was asking if there was a motion with regards to 5C. Is that correct? Is that where we were?
Yes, Madam Chair. This is Board Panel Member Linda Hull, and I move that the unanimous board panel decision be adopted as the decision of the full board.
Thank you, Board Member Hull. Is there a second?
Yes, Madam Chair, this is Board Member Sam Williams, and I second that motion.
Thank you, Board Member Williams. Are there any recusals from this matter? Okay, seeing and hearing none. Is there any opposition to the motion? Okay, seeing and hearing no opposition. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All opposed? That motion, I am also a yes. That motion is passed. Thank you, board members. Agenda item 6, discretionary full board review. For the cases listed in item 6 on your agenda, it has been recommended that full board review be granted. Those cases are 6A, G2770292, matter of Bond Secures Charity Health System. 6B, case number G2515013, matter of Delta Airlines, Inc. And 6C, case number G1784466, also 40209745, matter of West Babylon Union Free School. I move to refer these cases back to their respective panels for further consideration. Is there a second?
Madam Chair, Board Member Delan, and I second the motion.
Thank you, Board Member Delan. Are there any recusals from any of these matters?
Yes, Madam Chair. This is Board Member Lauren Loban, and I ask to be recused from 6C, the matter of West Babylon Union Free School, and also the case pertaining to it.
Okay. Thank you, Board Member Loban. Duly noted. Is there any opposition to the motion? Okay, seeing and hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you. All opposed? Hearing none, also yes, that motion is passed. Agenda item 7, other business. Is there any other business to discuss, board members? Okay, seeing and hearing none, agenda item 8, our guest speaker. Please join me now, and Robin, I do apologize that my video is not cooperating. Please join me now in welcoming 2 guest speakers who come from the Office of the Inspector General, Acting Inspector General Robin Adair, and Senior Investigative Counsel Brian Richmond, who are here to give us their annual report on the activities of the Workers' Compensation Fraud Inspector General's Office. Before being named Acting Inspector General, Ms. Adair served as Chief Deputy Inspector General. A former prosecutor, Ms. Adair is a seasoned attorney whose career includes work as Assistant Counsel with the Executive Chamber, Special Counsel for Ethics, Risk, and Compliance at the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and various other roles in state government. Ms. Adair began her legal practice at the Rensselaer County District Attorney's Office and has received several prestigious awards throughout her career, including the Public Service Excellence Award by the State Academy for Public Administration. Now, Brian Richmond serves as the Inspector General's Senior Investigative Counsel. Mr. Richmond investigates and assists in the criminal prosecution of all aspects of fraud in the New York State Workers' Compensation System. Before joining the offices of the Inspector General, he spent more than a decade in private practice, working to represent employers, municipalities, insurers, and their insureds in workers' compensation and other areas of civil defense litigation. Thank you both for joining us today. You have the floor.
All right.
Thank you, Chair Rodriguez. Esteemed board members, Acting General Counsel McMaster. It is an honor and a privilege to address the board this year. And bear with us while we load our slides.
I just need someone to pass the, there we go. I think they just passed it to me. We've got it, Robin.
All right, thank you, Brian. Okay, next slide. Look at that. You got fancy on me this morning. So the offices of the State Inspector General, we have 4 sides of the shop now, since Brian and I last addressed the board last fall. So we have our typical state offices of the Inspector General, where we're vested with the legal authority to investigate state employee fraud, waste, abuse, criminal activity, and conflicts of interest. As many of you know, we also investigate social services benefit fraud as the welfare inspector general. Of course, one of our reasons to address the board today is to provide you with updated metrics and to give an overview of this past year, 2020, for the workers' compensation fraud inspector general side of the shop. And then most recently in June, the functions of the gaming inspector general were merged and consolidated with our office as well. And so we've transitioned staff, and we have recently brought those particular functions on board.
Second, Robin.
Our office is comprised of investigators, auditors, attorneys, investigative counsels. We have forensic accountants, we have IT specialists, and we have investigative aides performing a myriad of functions within the office. Some provide administrative support, some provide complaint review support. Where we are located, we have our main offices are in Albany, Buffalo, and New York City, and we have smaller satellite offices located in Syracuse, Hauppauge on Long Island, and Suffern in Rockland County. The Workers' Compensation Fraud IG has very broad authority and legal jurisdiction to investigate any violations of law and regulation related to the workers' compensation system. Particularly, the enabling statute in the legal authority is found in WCL 136, and that vests the Workers' Compensation Fraud IG with the power to conduct and supervise investigations within and outside of the state, to subpoena witnesses, to administer oaths, to take testimony, and compel the production of documents. And as a part of these efforts, the Workers' Compensation Fraud IG and that office partners regularly and routinely with federal prosecutors, local district attorneys, the Attorney General's office, and other law enforcement partners that provide assistance for successful prosecutions of the violations of the workers' compensation law. Additionally, the Workers' Compensation Fraud IG recommends legislative, statutory, and regulatory changes. So we receive our case referrals from many different entities, and they come to us in a lot of different ways. And sometimes these referrals come through New York State agencies or managers. Sometimes they come directly from state employees or members of the public who submit complaints via our website or our complaint hotline. Sometimes they come through law enforcement agencies directly, or proactive initiatives that the office may be engaged in, whether it's a proactive initiative of the Workers' Comp Fraud IG or whether we're working with other groups or other partners. Sometimes our complaints come through carriers, third-party administrators, or even special investigative units. On occasion, we do receive complaints from municipalities. As you all know, the board is a major source of a referral in terms of how we receive our complaints. Similarly, our staff review every single 114A decision issued by the board to determine if there is the potential to open up an investigation. Case management. And I talked a little bit about that generally. How we receive complaints, from a variety of different media, phone, email, web portal, in person, not so much these days given the pandemic, but in the past more so. People are still able to appear in person at the office these days. I would just note that we are requiring that any member of the public or anyone else visiting the office has to be health screened, and there has to be an appointment made ahead of time. So once the complaints are actually received from those variety of sources, they're managed by the office's CMU, our case management unit, and they are reviewed weekly, on a weekly basis, by myself, by executive staff, and senior managers, where we take a look at the complaint. Sometimes there's some follow-up that's needed. We assess jurisdiction and whether it's actually legally appropriate for the office to handle the complaint. And then if it is non-jurisdictional for the office, or it's not necessarily appropriate for the office to handle the complaint, we'll look to make the proper referral to an agency or an entity with appropriate jurisdiction or subject matter expertise to handle the complaint. But as you can imagine, that's very circumstantial. With respect to workers' compensation related complaints, these complaints require oftentimes in-depth preliminary investigation, and these complaints are reviewed by the office's triage team, multidisciplinary triage team. So this team was formed several years ago, back in 2018, when it became apparent that there needed to be special attention paid specifically to workers' comp complaints, given the complexities of these types of complaints. And at that time, the office was receiving just a very high volume of complaints. And so they needed to be handled and addressed in a very specific and targeted manner. So this particular unit within the office is headed by an attorney and is comprised of investigators and an investigative nurse, and an auditor that is just devoted to this type of work. That does certain workups where need be. And Brian, as Brian is the attorney that works with triage and is in the trenches and intimately aware of the important function of this multidisciplinary team, can you just speak to the team and some of its functions and operations a little bit?
Sure, Robin. So the team, as Robin mentioned, is headed by me and with one of my more senior investigators. As Robin mentioned, it is very multidisciplinary. We have an experienced nurse, we have an auditor on the team, and we have multiple specialized insurance investigators on the team who also work full open cases. The point of the unit is really to make an initial assessment and do some initial investigation work in order to determine where resources should be set. Because of the volume of cases that we receive, not every case can have a full investigation team assessed to it. So we do an initial review of the allegations received from all sources that Robin went through, from the hotline calls, from 114A decisions, from NICB referrals, from all sources, really. And then we obtain in the triage unit policy information, payroll documentation. We reach out to complainants if they're not anonymous. We subpoena bank and other records. And then the team meets on a weekly basis to assess potential viability of cases and whether or not it's appropriate for that case to be fully opened and assigned an attorney and a investigator as a full investigation team, or it's more appropriate to be referred out to various places.
Thank you, Brian.
Yep.
So last year was unique in many ways. With the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic, the workers' compensation fraud IG saw some interesting trends within the workers' compensation system. So we saw a dramatic increase in unemployment throughout New York State. That started in March and April of 2020. And what was interesting was, statistically coupled with this dramatic increase in unemployment, we also saw workers' comp claims falling almost a quarter in 2020 to a 5-year low of about 139,000 and change. So this was sort of an inversely proportional response and a result. And we also, at the same time, saw the New York State court system limit or not even commence certain criminal proceedings, hearings, and prosecutions, and was not was not summoning grand juries, wasn't holding grand juries, and was on like a very limited calendar. And that calendar tend to prioritize court certain charges, criminal charges, and certain types of cases. So during this time, as we were directly affected and very much entrenched, and noticing a decrease in workers' compensation claims at this point in time, you'll see in the next few, actually, thanks, Brian. You'll see in the next slide how the number of complaints for this past year decreased. So we still had to figure out how to effectively process the complaints that we were receiving in the office. And we had to figure out this new landscape and how we could appropriately do business while ensuring and balancing the public safety and workers' compensation IG staff. So what we ended up doing was everybody was remote, much like many other agencies, and my understanding is the board itself in terms of how business was, being conducted. So we had remote operations. We conducted interviews remotely. We expanded our licensing for our WebEx and other virtual interviews. And we had to work with law enforcement partners in a new way. So we weren't always able to do in-person interviews of our target in the context of these criminal cases. So what we had to do is sometimes we ended up doing phone interviews. Sometimes we did WebEx virtual interviews. And other times, if we really needed to interview the target or an important witness in person, then we had to kind of set that particular case aside and come back to it a little bit later on when it became safe to commence more normalized operations. All of our access to files in our investigative systems were remote, and were at these particular resources. These were accessed in a remote manner, all digital, and so we had to work through some of our records management issues as well in order to balance safety. But I'm extremely impressed with the office and how quickly we pivoted and how we were not disrupted and business was not disrupted. And we were able to move forward, and in the wake of an extremely challenging and albeit unique and stressful at times year, we were extremely productive. So this past year, in 2020, we received a little over 1,000 complaints. That's down from, as I mentioned, 2019, where we had a little over 1,400. We had 1,441 complaints. It culminated in 13 arrests. And those particular arrests those cases were broken down by claimant fraud, there were 4, employer fraud, 8 of them, and then provider professional fraud, 1 case. When it was all said and done last year, there was $3.2 million in fraud. Another metric that we started tracking recently last year, actually, about 1.2 million restitution was successfully awarded, resulting from these criminal prosecutions. And that restitution is important because that's money that's made that goes back to the victims to make the victims whole. And so that restitution is paid back to state agencies, to SIF, to carriers, and to self-insured employers, people who have been aggrieved and were victims of fraud here. Okay, so in terms of workers' compensation fraud IGs, participation in initiatives and task force task forces. We just wanted to highlight a few for the board members today. Last year, we continued our regular meetings and partnerships with our fellow prosecutorial agencies, our partners, state and federal government. We've worked with SIF to share information, coordinate resources, and conduct joint investigations. And we've continued our longstanding participation in our workers' comp task force for the docks pilot facilities, and actually other state agencies as well, OMH facilities in particular too. We've also continued our participation on JTF, the Joint Task Force on Employee Misclassification and Worker Exploitation, and Northern District's New York Healthcare Fraud Task Force. And of course, we continue to coordinate practically on a daily basis with different divisions and offices at the board. Operations and Compliance, Office of the Medical Director, and Office of General Counsel. Now, Brian is going to talk through 3 particular case studies, and so he can highlight 3 of the different types of cases that that we've investigated and prosecuted over this past year. And the first case is actually hasn't concluded yet, but the other 2 have concluded. So we've appropriately anonymized these particular case studies. But we wanted to share some practical examples of workers' compensation fraud and some of the good work that this office has been doing. Thank you, Brian.
So for the annual report and for our presentation today, we chose not only a sampling of our 3 major types of cases that Robin talked about, the employer cases, a professional case, and a claimant case, but they also represent kind of a variety of sources of our complaint referrals that result in prosecution. And this first case, in fact, is a case that resulted in a prosecution excuse me, in 2020 that came directly from the board. So this was an uninsured contractor, a construction company that repeatedly submitted false CE200s with licensing applications in Rockland County. Of course, the company had employees and was required to carry workers' compensation insurance, and inevitably, a serious injury was sustained by one of its employees, resulting in hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical and indemnity payments by the Uninsured Employers Fund. And as I noted, the original complaint was submitted to the Inspector General by the compliance unit of the board, which noticed that there was an uninsured claim despite numerous applications on the board's website for multiple CE200s over the course of the same time frame. So the IG's investigation included interviews, subpoena documents, a detailed social media investigation, and ultimately revealed that the company had been in business since at least 2014 without ever obtaining workers' compensation insurance. The CE200s obtained from the board were filed with licensing applications throughout multiple years. The employee that was injured, he sustained multiple pretty serious injuries while painting, falling off of a ladder at a large commercial job for the contractor. And actually a key piece of evidence that we found that helped with the prosecution and is still helping with the prosecution is detailed billing records that were submitted by the construction company on that job where the employee was injured, which detailed the construction company's employees and the hours that they worked, and really effectively showed that they had on that job alone more than 6 employees, which is felony level as required under Workers' Comp 52. So the charges included Workers' Comp 114.3, a fraudulent practice charge, and a felony 52.1a charge. Of course, as Robin mentioned, this one particular case has is still pending with the Rockland County District Attorney's Office, so the defendant is innocent until proven guilty. I would note that the Uninsured Employers Fund was partially reimbursed in this case through a third-party action recovery by the employee, but in the prosecution, they are still seeking reimbursement for the Uninsured Employers Fund for the amount that they have not been reimbursed by the third-party action. Next case I want to discuss is a professional fraud case, which is unique in that it involved a stenographer. Usually our professional fraud cases involves dirty doctors, if you will. Doctors could, but this was a professional fraud case involving a stenographer in Onondaga County, Central New York. So in this case, a self-insured Central New York stenographer created a very simple scheme to defraud multiple insurance companies out of more than $150,000. And as I said, it was a very simple scheme because it involved picking select bills and just adding a zero to the end of them and getting 10 times what that bill would otherwise get on particular bills, but we're involving multiple insurance companies. So we actually received this complaint through the Inspector General's partnership with the National Insurance Crime Bureau, NICB, which we have developed and expanded over the last several years at the Inspector General's office. The NICB is an organization that receives complaints from member private insurance companies for all types of insurance fraud, including workers' compensation fraud. And we regularly obtain referrals from the NICB forwarded from insurance companies in regards to workers' compensation fraud investigations, and those are funneled through our triage team for a detailed assessment. So in this case, the IG's investigation included a very detailed audit of billing records submitted to insurers, multiple insurers, over a 4-year period of time. It included interviews of insurance representatives, which unveiled that pattern of fraud. But it also noted a potential gambling problem and maybe a source of some of the money that was coming out. We found that over that same 4-year period of $1.8 million that were entered into the stenographer's account, 1.3 million of that 1.8 million was withdrawn at a casino. So that's, I don't know any that was probably deposited back from that, but 1.3 million was withdrawn from the casino at least. So there was a source there that we discovered. Our charges on this one were grand larceny in the second degree, given the level and the level of fraud and the amount of fraud, I should say. And the stenographer actually pled guilty as charged to the second degree charge. She was sentenced to 5 years probation, and she was ordered to pay and has already paid a substantial portion of the $152,000 in restitution that we found. The last case I wanted to talk about is a claimant case involving a state employee who happens to be a correctional officer. Under the NYSCOBA contract, state correctional officers are able to receive full state wages for workers' compensation injuries if they meet certain criteria for up to the first 6 months of benefits. Those benefits are partially reimbursed by the insurer, the New York State Insurance Fund, at the workers' compensation rate. So it's workers' compensation indemnity payments that are subject to reimbursement and falls under our jurisdiction because of that. This case involved a Sing Sing correctional officer who submitted multiple false medical notes related to 3 separate workers' compensation injuries over the course of a couple of years. It enabled him to receive more than 100 days off and paying over more than $16,000 in wage indemnity payments over that time period. Like many of our complaints, this one was made by an anonymous source, which may sometimes slow the start of an Inspector General's investigation, but it certainly doesn't hinder the investigation at all. So we'll be doing an in-depth look regardless of the source. So through multiple interviews of physicians that were the purported signatories of the medical notes, the IG investigation was able to pin down and separate the false notes from the true ones and determine the extent of the fraud. So the correctional officer was charged with 9 counts of felony level offering a false instrument for filing in the first degree. And earlier this year, he pled guilty. He resigned from state service, and he signed several waivers of indemnity, which were submitted to SIF, involving each of the workers' comp cases that were implicated in his fraud. Robin?
Thanks, Brian. So in terms of coming out of 2021 and looking toward the calendar year 2022, the IG's office will continue to fulfill its mission, particularly in this unprecedented, post-COVID world that we're living in. We're going to retain some aspects of, remote interviewing and remote work, but as we start to transition staff back into the office, we will be looking at a new normal and hopefully having more in-person interactions and be able to conduct more face-to-face interviews. We'll continue to investigate allegations of fraud, and we're interested in looking at our COVID workers' comp claims. We haven't seen many so far, but we think that that'll be an opportunity for us to work with the board and staff at the board to continue to look at these types of claims, which involve falsified medical reports, lab results, doctor's notes, that sort of thing. And we're interested to kind of see how that plays into longer term symptom monitoring. And we'll continue to partner with the board and with our law enforcement partners and to look at and identify additional proactive initiatives. And hopefully we'll be able to do some face-to-face in-person training and outreach this year. It was a little bit challenging this past year as people, everybody kind of had a different focus. And, to that end, we're also looking to staff up our workers' compensation fraud side of the shop and add investigators upstate and downstate and investigative counsels as well, as we anticipate workers' comp claim numbers rising again to pre-pandemic levels. And, we have some critical positions that we need to backfill in order to be able to keep the wheels on and to keep everything running. We thank you very much, Chair Rodriguez and esteemed board members, Acting General Counsel McMaster, for your time today and for the opportunity to address the board about our 2020 annual report.
Oh, thank you both very much for joining us and presenting your annual report. Speaking for the board, it's always a pleasure to be reminded of your process and actually to hear how you've navigated the challenges posed by the pandemic. As always, we really appreciate your efforts on workers' compensation matters, and we really value our partnership. So again, thank you so much for presenting to us today.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you.
With that, we are going to conclude the meeting. May I please have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Yes, Madam Chair. This is Board Member Mark Higgins, and I move to adjourn the meeting.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Yes, Madam Chair. This is Board Member Martin Delan, and I second the motion.
Thank you. Is there any opposition to the motion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, I am also a yes. That motion is passed. Meeting adjourned. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, Clarissa.